They called her a curse long before the snow came down thick enough to drown a man standing. Her name was Mara on the birth roll, but out here in the scoured hills west of Lost Calf Crossing, folks spat that name like a tooth gone rotten. Some said she hexed her mother to die before the cord was cut. Others swore she turned her father's whiskey to poison when he put his fists on her too many times. Truth was, Mara just kept breathing, and that unsettled people more than any ghost story. When the first flurries rode down in late November, the town elders gathered in the half-burnt church and decided they'd had enough of Mara's eyes looking through them. The preacher said she carried winter in her bones, that wherever she stepped the cold followed. Maybe it was the calves dying in the night, or the storekeeper's boy coughing blood, or maybe it was just that when times turn mean, folks need a throat to blame. So they dragged her from the crooked shed she slept in behind the blacksmith's barn. They tied her wrists with hemp rope rough enough to peel skin, then lashed her ankles the same. She didn't fight, not because she agreed with their gospel, but because her father once told her, struggling only feeds the dogs. She learned to go quiet, to shrink her breath, to let the hate pass over her like wind over snowdrifts. They left her at the North Ridge, beyond the last line of fence posts where the prairie spills out open and white and endless. One man, Jonah Parrish, with hay-colored hair and a stitched-up grin, lifted her chin with the barrel of his old scattergun. He called her a frost witch, spit tobacco juice in the snow beside her cheek, and promised her the wolves would know what to do with the curse. Then they rode off, horses blowing steam, hooves punching through crusted drifts. Their laughter faded with the daylight. By the time dusk bled its purple veins across the sky, Mara sat alone, wrists already raw from the rope. She shifted once. The rope burned her skin in a way that almost felt alive. She wondered if that heat was what damnation tasted like. Night fell hard. Snowflakes the size of silver dollars drifted down, melted against the warmth of her neck only to freeze again when the wind found them. She pulled her knees in, but the rope at her ankles bit back. Each breath she took turned her throat to ice. Once she thought she heard wolves, low yips and a soft pat of paws on frozen ground. But maybe that was her mind gnawing at its own edges. When the moon rose full and bruised, Mara's eyelids grew heavy with the hush of cold. She thought of her mother, who'd had soft hands and a voice that smelled like pine pitch and soap. She thought of her father's belt. She thought of the heat of the forge when she used to sneak in to watch the blacksmith's boy hammer iron until it glowed. All that warmth, all that light gone, swallowed up by drift and silence. She whispered a word, or maybe just a sound. It ghosted out of her mouth, turned to frost before it reached her knees. She closed her eyes to listen for it landing somewhere, a prayer to a God she never met, a promise to herself not to die easy. Beyond the rise, far off but growing closer, the hush of hooves pressed snow. One rider, alone, bearing no torch but carrying fire all the same. The lone rider's shadow, his name, was Eli Creed, though he hadn't spoken it aloud in near 3 winters. Folks knew him as Creed, if they knew him at all. Most didn't. He'd ridden west from Missouri with a bullet still in his thigh and a Bible page folded into the lining of his duster. Once he'd had a wife named Clara and a boy who learned to walk on bare dirt floors. Clara was 5 years in the ground now, typhoid in a flood year, and the boy had gone colder still, taken by fever while Eli was off driving cattle north for men who never bothered to learn his name. He learned not to love the world back. Not with words, anyway. He loved it with the way he left people alone, with the way he never raised his gun first, with the way he gathered half-dead strays and gave them the last of his jerky and his silence. The horse under him now was a piebald called Mercy, white in sorrel patches smeared with snowmelt. Mercy breathed steam that rose around Eli's boots and vanished into the night like prayers too small to hear. He leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowed against the needle-sharp flakes. Something was wrong up this ridge. He felt it in the way the wind bent back his collar and hissed through the cottonwoods. It was a quiet wrong, but Eli knew quiet wrongs were the worst of all. When he saw her, at first he thought it might be a trick of the drift. Some wind-bowed stump, wrapped in pale rags. But when Mercy's hooves crunched close, he saw the rope, saw the small hands turn purple where the blood had tried to fight its way back in. He saw the raw skin on her wrists, the dark hair stiff with frost where it tangled around her cheeks. She didn't flinch when his shadow covered her, just kept breathing, shallow and even, as if her chest might splinter under too much air. Eli swung down stiffly. His right leg dragged in the snow. The old bullet made sure he never forgot it. He crouched beside her. The wind found the raw skin on his knuckles where he'd split them on a fence post 3 days ago. He smelled her breath, sour with hunger, faintly sweet like blood from cracked lips. "You alive?" he asked, voice rough enough to scrape bark. She blinked once. The snow settled in her lashes. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a wet, shallow exhale that trembled on his coat sleeve. He pulled a clasp knife from his pocket, flicked the blade open with a snap that made Mercy's ears twitch. He cut the rope at her ankles first. It fell in a slack curl. Then her wrists, careful not to slice too deep where the fibers had bitten. The rope thudded into the snow, already half buried by fresh drift. She stayed curled up, wrists tucked close like a sparrow guarding broken wings. He thought of asking her name, but held his tongue. Names were heavy things. Best to save them for when a body knew they'd live long enough to wear one again. Eli took off his duster, draped it over her shoulders. The cold lunged at his ribs, but he ignored it. He hooked one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, lifting her like a sack of grain that might come apart if jostled. Her head fell against his collarbone, hair smelling of wood smoke and old sweat and fear. Mercy shifted under the weight of them both, but didn't spook. She'd carried heavier ghosts before. As Eli climbed into the saddle, settling the girl across his lap, he looked back down the ridge. He wondered which bastard's breath had named her curse. He wondered if any of them would be waiting when the thaw came, or if their own sins would freeze them in place, same as they'd meant to do to her. He dug his heels in, gentle but firm. Mercy turned south, toward the shack Eli called his own, a roof, a stove, a fire that might just be enough to burn the rope's shame into ash. A fire for the condemned creed's shack sat in a bowl of cottonwoods along a half-frozen creek that whispered under its own breath all winter. No sign marked the trail in. That was how Eli liked it. No drifters, no curious ranch hands, no lawmen sniffing for what he might be hiding. He'd built the place himself after Clara's grave got its stone. For walls of rough pine, a crooked porch, a stovepipe that leaned east from a windstorm that never quite let go. He laid the girl on his narrow bunk, the one Clara once patched with calico scraps, now faded to ghost colors. Her breath was shallow, chest hitching up like she was hauling each gulp from someplace deep inside the ground. The snow clung to her hair and sleeves encrusted knots. Eli brushed it away with a calloused palm, careful not to wake the raw around her wrists. He stoked the iron stove until the creosote cracked and snapped. Flames licked the split pine and spit sparks up the pipe. Heat crawled out across the floorboards, warm enough to bite the edge off the graveyard chill still tucked in her bones. He hung his coat near the stove to dry, watching it drip meltwater that hissed when it hit the iron. She woke once while he knelt beside her, eyes flickering open like a lantern low on oil. Up close her face looked younger than he'd guessed under the frost. Hardly more than 20, maybe less if you brushed away the hunger and the hurt. He poured her a tin cup of water, held it to her lips. Her cracked mouth parted, but her throat fought the first swallow like it was fire. Still, she drank, eyes locked on him like she was waiting for a blow. He said nothing. He'd found words did more harm than good, with people left to die. When she drifted back under, Eli stepped outside. He needed air colder than the thoughts crowding his skull. The moon perched low over the trees, swollen and yellow like old bruised flesh. The creek muttered under ice, telling stories to the roots that clung on for spring. His breath steamed in short bursts that faded before they found the sky. He tugged the rope from his pocket, the same one he cut off her wrists. The fibers were stiff with frozen blood. He ran it between his fingers, feeling the rough bite that must have gnawed at her skin for hours, maybe longer. He tossed it into the snow, but thought better of it, and picked it up again. A symbol like that didn't deserve to rot neat and quiet under spring mud. Better it burned. Back inside, he fed it into the stove, strand by strand. The hemp curled black, popped and flared, gave up the stink of old pain and scorched lies. He watched until every scrap glowed down to gray ash and drifted with the embers. When the rope was gone, he found himself staring at the girl again, the way her shoulders curled tight, like she'd folded herself into a shape too small to hate. He pulled the quilt higher on her collarbone. Her pulse fluttered at the hollow of her throat like a moth trapped behind glass. He settled in the rough chair by the door, shotgun resting across his knee. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carried the smell of snow and smoke and distant hooves. Somewhere in that cold dark, he knew the men who left her weren't finished. Men like that never were. Eli Creed closed his eyes and let the fire crackle out its rough lullaby. He didn't pray, not since Clara, but he let the warmth find the girl's bones, let it soak her through so, when morning came, she'd remember what it felt like not to freeze for someone else's sin. When she woke next, she'd find her rope gone, and maybe, just maybe, she'd believe a little in warmth again. The name she spoke morning came on a wind that rattled the stovepipe and painted the window panes in a glaze of frost flowers. Eli roused stiff and half numb from the chair, neck kinked from the long watch. He stretched slow, careful not to wake the soreness that lived permanent in his leg. Mercy wickered out back, stamping the snow from her hooves under the lean-to. The world outside stayed white and heavy, the kind of cold that wanted you to believe you'd never feel spring again. Inside, the warmth clung stubborn. The girl stirred under the patchwork quilt, eyelids fluttering like wings pressed too long in a box. When she sat up, she winced, the motion dragging the soreness in her shoulders awake. Her eyes found Eli where he stood at the stove, ladling porridge into a dented tin bowl. Eyes too big for her thin face, rimmed with lashes iced together from the night before. She looked at him like a deer pinned by lantern light. No panic, just that deep, wordless question. Am I alive or dreaming I am? He crossed the room slow, set the bowl in her lap. Steam rose and curled around her wrists where the rope burns had crusted over pink and raw. He didn't say eat. He didn't have to. Hunger's a language that talks for you. She lifted the spoon with shaking fingers, brought it to her mouth. The first taste seemed to confuse her. Salt and warmth. Honest oats that didn't taste like the back of a barn. Her eyes went slick at the corners, but she blinked it down like it might offend him to see her cry. Eli settled on the edge of the bunk, elbows on his knees. He let the quiet stretch, just the scrape of the spoon, the crackle of a fresh log he'd thrown on the stove. Finally, he spoke, voice low, roughened by the hush of too many unsaid things. What do they call you? She flinched at they. He saw it. How the word curled her shoulders in, like she was bracing for the echo of boots on floorboards. Then she drew a breath that looked too big for her ribs and said, Mara. She spat it out like it tasted sour on her tongue. He nodded, letting her see he'd heard her right. Mara. He rolled the word once, like he was testing how it sat in the air. You hungry enough for more? She paused, spoon hovering midair. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, as if she half expected him to yank the bowl away, laugh, tell her she'd eaten her share of mercy. When he didn't move, she nodded, voice a whisper that rasped like a match head. Please. He ladled another scoop, let it slop in her tin. Her eyes tracked the steam rising off the mush like it was the most beautiful thing she'd seen in months. After a while, when the bowl lay empty in her lap and her spine no longer curled so tight, Mara looked up. Her lips parted once, closed, then opened again, the shape of a question trying to find the nerve to crawl out. Why'd you stop? She asked finally. Her voice was hoarse but steady, the tone of someone not used to the answer but needing it all the same. Eli didn't flinch, didn't lie either. He dragged a hand down the bristle on his jaw, feeling the ghost of frost on his knuckles where the rope had burned them too. Didn't look right, them leaving you for the wolves. Didn't sit right. He left it at that. Didn't say he'd seen too many left behind. Didn't say he'd buried a boy with fever on his lips who might have lived if someone stopped sooner. Didn't say anything about Clara's grave or the way the wind had sounded that night. Like it carried her voice, reminding him not all curses were real. Mara watched him like she was hunting for something under his skin. When she didn't find it, whatever dark thing she feared, she let out a breath that eased her shoulders down. She set the empty bowl on the floor, folded her hands in her lap, rope scars pink against her palms. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, small as seeds, but heavy as thawed earth. Eli Creed just nodded once, the silence between them stitched now by the crackle of the fire. A promise that warmth, once given, don't have to be begged for twice. Tracks in the ash of the stove kept the cold at bay, but outside the snow kept falling, quiet but certain, burying the world a fresh inch every hour. Eli checked Mercy's tack under the lean-to, brushing frost from the mare's flank. She flicked her ears and snorted at the hush of his words. Half prayers, half promises that he'd feed her sweet hay once this mess cleared. He left her with a rub along the neck and stepped back inside where Mara sat on the edge of the bunk, ankles tucked under like she might take flight if he so much as turned his back. Eli didn't crowd her with questions. He knew better. Words were like traps. Snap them too quick, and you lose whatever trust might have started to sprout. He busied himself splitting kindling near the stove, the axe blade ringing soft against the grain. Each crack of wood echoed under the low roof. Mara watched him with eyes wide as a barn owl's, fingers ghosting over her wrists now and again as if the rope might slither back while she wasn't looking. It was Mara who finally cracked the hush. "They think I killed their calves," she said, voice soft as the creek under ice. Eli didn't stop chopping, but slowed his pace so the blade wouldn't drown her words. "They think I poisoned the feed, that I brought winter in my blood." He didn't laugh. He just set the axe aside and fed another stick into the stove. Sparks jumped, found the old rope ash, turned it dull red for a moment before settling. "You do it?" he asked, tone flat as dry timber. No accusation, just a shape of truth he needed to fit in his mind. Mara's jaw worked. She shook her head once. "No, just bad year. Bad earth. Wolves hungry same as us. But they see a curse in a girl who don't run." Eli nodded slow. He'd seen towns run on the same poison before, people piling blame on whatever shape couldn't punch back. He knew that poison well. It had taken Clara in whispers, if you'd stayed home, if you'd prayed harder, if you'd loved her right. Always the fault of the quiet ones. Mara's gaze drifted to the iron stove. She studied the coals like she could read fortunes in the shifting glow. "They'll come looking," she said, "when snow lifts enough for hooves to find the trail. They won't let me stay gone." Eli leaned against the doorframe, felt the rough pine bite through his shirt. "Let him look," he said. "Trail won't be so easy to read when I'm done." He crossed the room, pulled his old coat from the hook by the door. From a shelf tucked behind the stove, he fished out a battered tin box. He popped the lid. Inside sat bullets, loose and rolling like dry seeds. He thumbed a few into his palm, feeling their weight. Each one a promise, sharp and cold and simple. "You got folks?" he asked, eyes not leaving the brass in his hand. Mara flinched at the question. After a moment, she just shook her head. "None that'd claim me now. None left who'd try." The way she said it, quiet, final, cut deeper than the wind ever could. Eli tucked the box back on its shelf, careful to leave the lid cracked for easy reach. "You got me for now," he said, simple as a fence post driven into frozen dirt. "That'll have to be enough." Mara watched him the way a wild thing watches the dark before dawn, hoping the shadows hold a shape kinder than the night that came before. She looked past him, toward the door, toward the world that lay buried in drift and sin and men who'd name a girl a curse to keep their own sins sweet. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere down in the cottonwoods, a branch cracked under weight. Maybe snow, maybe something heavier. Eli listened with the ear of a man who'd heard death walk up slow before. He moved to the window, eyes on the silver stretch of trees and creek beyond. Tracks in the snow fade, he thought. Ash blows clean. But some things, like truth and blame, they stick no matter how deep you bury 'em. Inside, the stove crackled on. A small son for a condemned girl and a man who'd once buried his fire with his family. Tonight, the flame burned for both. The wolf and the thorn night bled slow into the creek hollow. A lantern flickered on a nail by the bunk, its glass globe smudged with thumbprints from years of use. Outside, the snow eased to a soft drift, the hush of a world catching its breath. Inside, Mara lay half-curled beneath the quilt, eyes fixed on the knot in the ceiling where sap once bled through the pine. She could taste the rope still, the bitter ghost of hemp, and fear clinging to her tongue. Eli sat by the stove with his boots kicked off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. A tin cup of coffee steamed between his hands, gone lukewarm long ago. He watched the fire dance over the charred rope ash, the way embers flared and sank. A slow burial for someone else's cruelty. Neither spoke for a while. The wind slipped in at the corners of the shack, humming through the gaps like a lullaby for broken things. When the silence stretched too long, Mara's voice cut through it, thin, tired but steady. "You ever kill a man, Creed?" She said his name soft, like it might spook him. He didn't flinch, just sipped the coffee and set it down careful so it didn't clatter. "Once," he said, "maybe twice, depending how you count." Mara's eyes found his in the lantern light, dark pools that flickered with the flame. Why? He thought of the cattle trail north, the creek crossing where a boy younger than Mara pulled steel on him for the promise of a few dollars. He thought of the fever dream that took Clara, the pious neighbors who called it punishment for his sins. He thought of a world that never ran out of reasons to hurt what stayed soft. "Sometimes," Eli said slow, words scraping from somewhere deep, "a man aims to tear the thorn out of his foot. Sometimes the thorn's got teeth." Mara absorbed that without blinking. She understood more than she'd ever say. You could see it in the rope burns, the way her shoulders curled like a branch bent too many winters but never snapped clean. Eli shifted in his chair, pulled his coat off the back, and draped it over her legs again. The gesture startled her. Not the warmth, but the kindness of it, the way he didn't look at her like a burden or a ghost. She pressed her palm to the worn canvas, fingers tracing a patch Clara had stitched once, a half-moon tear sewn shut with red thread. Outside, Mercy stamped the snow and huffed clouds into the dark. Eli's eyes flicked to the door, catching the faintest echo of brush crackling where it shouldn't be. He reached for the shotgun, laid it across his knees like a sleeping dog. Mara saw it too. Her breath snagged on her teeth. "They're coming, ain't they?" Eli nodded. "Or the wolves are. Either way, I'll greet him the same." She pulled the coat tighter around her knees. The fear was there, painted plain on her face, but under it, something else flickered like a coal that refused to die. Defiance, small but stubborn. He liked that about her. The town hadn't frozen it out of her yet. She whispered something then, half prayer, half curse. He didn't catch it all, just the last word, mother. He wondered if she meant hers, or if she was cursing him for stepping in where no man had business stepping. "Get some sleep," Eli said, voice soft enough it barely reached her through the crackle of the stove. "They gotta find us first. Cold's on our side for now." She settled back, eyes still open but heavy, lashes fluttering against the hollows of her cheeks. He watched her drift under, the lantern throwing shadows that danced like old ghosts along the beams. Out in the trees, a branch popped. A shape moved slow through the drift, maybe a wolf sniffing the trail, maybe something worse. Eli leaned forward, thumb brushed the shotgun stock, and waited for the dark to speak. Mara's breath evened out, the kind of sleep that belongs to the hunted, half in this world, half in one where the rope never found her wrists. She dreamed of snowfields and thorn bushes blooming red in frozen dirt, roots deep, flowers defiant. Inside that shack, the fire burned on. Two souls pressed together by the sharp edge of winter and the soft promise that not all thorns draw blood without reason. Blood in the snow dawn cracked slow over the hollow, a thin pale wash that did nothing to thaw the frost on Eli's windows. He'd stayed awake long after Mara's breathing slipped into the hush of dream. Every branch creak, every distant rustle in the brush, he weighed like a promise half kept. By first light, he knew it wasn't just wolves sniffing the edge of his land. He stepped outside before sunup, boots biting deep into drift. The air cut sharp through his flannel, wrapped his lungs in needles. Mercy raised her head from the lean-to, ears swiveling at the crunch of his steps. She stamped once, as if to say she'd stand ready if need be. Eli tugged his hat low, adjusted the shotgun across his shoulder, and scanned the tree line. Tracks, clear as sin. For sets, men on foot. Smart enough to leave the horses tethered below the ridge. Quiet enough to hope the snow would muffle their trespass. He could read them easy. Heavy boots, cheap soles, one dragging a toe through the powder. Jonah Parrish, maybe. That farm boy never did lift his feet proper. Eli spat into the snow. The spit froze near on impact. He ducked back inside, cold air ghosting behind him like an unwelcome guest. Mara sat up, quilt around her shoulders, hair a mess of dark tangles that made her look younger than her scars ever let her be. "They're close," he said, voice like gravel under a wagon wheel. "Maybe an hour, maybe less." Her eyes found the window, found the world she'd been dragged from to die in. "They'll burn it down if you hide me," she said. Matter of fact, like someone stating the sky's blue or fire burns. Eli grunted, half a laugh, half a curse. "They can try." He moved to the shelf behind the stove, the battered tin box, the same one he'd thumbed the night before. He cracked it open, checked the brass rounds, loaded the shotgun slow and clean. Mara watched every motion, hands fisted in the quilt like she could squeeze her fear out through her knuckles. "You ever shoot?" Eli asked. She blinked, startled. Not by the question, but by the idea someone might think she'd ever been trusted with steel. She shook her head. "My father, he'd sooner put iron to my back than in my hands." Eli nodded once. He rummaged in a drawer, fished out a rusty old Colt with a chipped ivory grip. He flipped it open, checked the chamber. Not pretty, but it would speak if cornered. He crouched by the bunk, laid the revolver on the quilt beside her knee. "If they come through that door and I fall first, you point and squeeze. Ain't no curse in a bullet. Only in the hands that force you to need it." Mara stared at the pistol like it was a live snake. Her breath fogged the air between them. "If I run, you don't," he cut in, gentle but sharp as a broken spur. "Run, and they'll find you again. Better they find you with teeth." She swallowed that, nodded once, small but sure. Some piece of her that had curled up to die out there in the snow began to uncurl. He saw it, the shape of a thorn, stubborn and green, even under frost. Outside, a branch cracked, closer than before. A crow cawed and took off in a black smear against the sky. Eli rose, thumbed the shotgun's hammer back to rest. He caught Mara's eye, the girl they'd called a curse, now sitting behind a borrowed gun with a fire she hadn't asked for, but would carry all the same. "You're not what they say," he told her, low so only the coals in the creek could hear. "Remember that when they knock." She held his gaze. Her hands stopped trembling just enough for her fingers to brush the revolver's grip. In that moment, the rope's ghost slipped further back into the shadows behind her. Eli Creed turned to the door. Beyond it, the world waited, boots crunching snow, voices muttering sins into cold dawn air. He planted his boots square on the threshold, the shotgun cradled loose but ready. Mercy stamped once, her breath rising like a signal that blood might soak the snow today, but not without a fight. Inside, Mara breathed slow, eyes on the door, thumb brushing the trigger like a prayer carved from iron. If they wanted their curse back, they'd have to bleed for her first. Voices at the door, they came at sunrise, for shapes cut black against the drift, breath fogging like steam from some crooked engine of old sins. Jonah Parrish led them, his scattergun slung lazy across his shoulder, that stitched grin riding his teeth same as ever. Behind him trudged Bram Carter, the storekeeper's oldest, mean as a wet rattler and twice as eager to strike. The other two, younger boys mostly, carried axes they probably thought made them men. They wore fear like an extra coat, heavy but necessary to hide their thin courage. Inside, Eli felt them before he heard them. The hush between boots crunching, the muttered curses, the way the air bent tight around the shack. He glanced once at Mara where she sat behind the stove, half wrapped in his coat, thumb brushing the Colt's grip so soft it might have been a rosary bead. He leaned to the window, enough to see Parrish spit into the snow, cock his scattergun one-handed. Jonah's voice carried like a whip crack. "Creed," he hollered. "Ain't no sense playing fool. Send the witch out now, and maybe we leave your bones in one piece." Eli opened the door, just enough to plant his boot against the frame. The wind bit through the gap, cold enough to cut, but not cold enough to chase men like these back to their fires. "She's no witch," Eli called back, calm as a man asking the price of feed. "She's a girl you wronged. She stays." Parrish barked a laugh, rough and high. "She stays?" He hawked spit again, this time letting it land on the porch boards near Eli's boot. "Ain't how it works, Creed. She cursed half our stock dead. What you reckon she'll do to you once she's done wearing your coat and drinking your beans?" Behind Eli, Mara flinched at that, the old shame crawling its way up her throat again. He didn't look back, just shifted his shotgun, thumb dragging the hammer half back with a soft click that made the youngest boy's eyes go wide. "You want her," Eli said, his voice flat but carrying fine on the still morning air. "Come take her. Try it honest." Bram Carter stepped up beside Parrish, axe blade resting on his shoulder. "Ain't here for a duel, Creed. Town wants it done. Ain't no man standing for a witch and living to see spring." Eli's eyes flicked past them, snow broken in clumps where hooves waited tethered to saplings beyond the ridge. No more men, no lawmen lurking behind their teeth, no judge riding up with papers to make it neat. Just them, their guns, and the cold that took no sides. Inside, he heard the faint scrape of Mara shifting on the bunk, the quiet click of the Colt's hammer testing the weight of a moment she'd never been allowed to hold before. "You boys listen close," Eli called, words soft but cutting through the wind. "First one steps on my boards, loses his knee. Next one loses his gut. Third, well, best you kill me for she find her mark." Jonah spat again, eyes twitching mean. "She's weak, Creed. A crow pecked to bone. She'll squeal when she sees blood." Eli's lip twitched, almost a smile, almost pity. "Then you best pray I fall quick, 'cause if I don't, you'll see she ain't the one squealing." They stood in that hush, 4 against 2, breath rising like ghosts that wouldn't scatter. Somewhere behind the boys, a crow settled on a branch, wings tucked tight, watching. Inside the shack, Mara closed her eyes once. She saw the rope again, but this time she saw it burning, crackling down to ash while the snow fell outside. She opened her eyes, found the door, found the shape of Eli Creed standing wide enough to break the wind for her. She pressed the barrel to her knee, thumb ready on the hammer. Her pulse drummed in her wrists where the scars shone pink and defiant. Outside, Jonah Parrish adjusted his grip on the scattergun, breath hissing like steam through clenched teeth. He stepped forward, just one step onto the lower boards of Creed's porch. The first mistake. Inside the shack, the iron stove breathed heat. The rope's ghost curled tighter into smoke, and the girl they called a curse waited for the knock that would prove whose blood stained the snow first. The first shot, it happened quick, the way all ugly truths do when there's no more lies to wrap around them. Parrish's boots scraped the porch boards, scattering snow like salt over fresh meat. Eli caught the shift in his shoulder, the twitch that said he'd come ready to swing first. The scattergun rose half an inch, just enough to promise thunder. Eli didn't wait for thunder. The shotgun cracked once, a roar that filled the hollow, so sudden the trees shivered it back. The scattergun clattered from Parrish's hands, a chunk of stock torn away as the buckshot shredded past his wrist. Blood misted on the snow, sharp, bright, steaming like truth laid bare. Parrish screamed, clutching the ruin of his hand to his chest. He stumbled backward off the porch, boots slipping in his own crimson spill. Bram Carter jumped, surprise first, then rage, then that cheap courage that comes easy when you're standing behind someone else's pain. He raised the axe, teeth bared like a coyote cornered in a dry well. He took 2 steps up the porch, boots thudding on Eli's boards like they owned them. Inside, Mara heard every footstep like a drum in her chest. She pressed her palm hard to the revolver's grip. She'd never fired one, never even touched the cold iron of a chambered promise until last night. But the rope had taught her about pain. The rope had taught her about silence. And Creed, standing there with the frost on his coat and the heat in his eyes, had taught her one last thing. Some curses come loaded with teeth. Bram lunged for Eli, axe swinging wide, sloppy, desperate, too wild to hit a mark that knew when to duck. Eli slipped left, shoulder braced against the doorframe. He brought the shotgun stock up, caught Bram's jaw with the hard heel of the wood. Teeth snapped together with a crack like dry twigs. Bram staggered sideways, but he didn't fall. Inside, Mara felt the moment open like a door only she could step through. She rose halfway from the bunk, knees weak but locked steady. She braced the Colt on the edge of the stove, sighted through the doorway at Bram's broad back, the back that had turned on her when she was dragged from the barn like a sack of offal. The back that swung at Eli now, hoping to split him like a fence rail. Her thumb cocked the hammer. The sound was small, a click swallowed up by the rush of blood in her ears. She drew a breath that hurt her ribs and held it. For the first time since the rope's bite, she wasn't the one bound. Bram swung again, this time lower, aimed at Creed's gut. Eli caught the handle, the blade skimming his sleeve, tearing canvas but missing flesh. He shoved Bram backward, boots skidding on the porch boards slick with fresh snow and Parrish's spatter. Mara squeezed. The Colt barked, louder than she'd guessed, a thundercrack that kicked her wrist back hard enough to burn. The slug caught Bram high in the shoulder. He spun, eyes wide, mouth open like he'd seen a ghost in the snow. His axe clanged to the porch. He slapped a hand to the hole that bloomed red through his coat, stumbled down the steps, knees buckling in the drift. Eli didn't waste the moment. He swung the shotgun up, sighted past Bram's collapse, found the two boys frozen near the tree line. Faces pale, axes clutched like they might turn wood to armor. "You want this?" Eli roared, voice full of the fire Mara had poured into the bullet. "Step up. Come claim your curse." They didn't. Boys, after all. The sort raised to bark behind bigger dogs. They turned instead, boots scrabbling in the snow, breath ragged clouds as they bolted for the tethered horses. One dropped his axe in the drift, left it behind like a child's toy forgotten in last summer's sun. Parrish whimpered near the porch, hand a mess of meat and bone. Bram lay half-curled beside him, shock making his breath rattle against the drift. Eli stood over them, shotgun still warm, steam rising off the muzzle. Inside, Mara sank back against the bunk. The Colt fell from her fingers onto the quilt, barrel smoking faintly. She pressed her palm to her chest, felt her heart slam against her ribs, not out of fear, but because it was hers again. Hers to quicken, hers to calm, hers to stand ready next time they called her a curse. Outside, the snow fell again, softer now, settling over the blood like an old quilt pulled up to hush a child to sleep. Ash and roots by the time dusk bent its knees over the hollow. The snow had turned pink where it met the stain that used to be Bram's fight and Jonah's bravado. The two of them were gone now, not dead, but left crawling down the ridge like busted dogs. Eli had let them keep their breath, figured a rumor of blood and bone would travel faster than a corpse ever could. Word would reach Lost Calf Crossing by tomorrow's dawn. Let it. Let them chew on the tail of a lone rider who fed the curse of fire instead of frost. Inside the shack, the warmth from the stove clung thicker than it ever had. A hush of pine, pitch smoke, and scorched hemp, and the last wet hiss of boot leather drying by the door. Mara sat near the coals on her knees, picking through the ash where the rope had died 2 nights before. Between her fingers, the grit left black lines like war paint across her skin. Eli poured water into the tin basin, dipped a rag, wrung it out. He knelt beside her, not close enough to crowd her small flame, but near enough she could lean if the weight got mean again. "You don't have to scrub it," he said, voice just above the crackle. "It's gone." She didn't look at him, just sifted ash, thumb smearing a dark stripe over her rope scars. "It's not gone," she murmured. "It's buried. Same thing till you dig it up again." Eli didn't argue. He knew about buried things. Knew how graves whispered at your dreams when the wind found the right gap under your door. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a tin of salve, the same as Boy's fever had left behind, untouched since the grave was packed tight. He uncapped it, dipped 2 fingers, and held them up, waiting. Mara studied him. This man who'd stopped on a ridge when no law told him he had to. A man who'd burned her shame and handed her iron with no price stitched to it. She lifted her wrists, wrists that still wore her past like thin shadows. Eli spread the salve across the burns, careful, patient, a ritual not of healing, but of promise. No rope here. Not again. When he was done, she lowered her hands, pressed her palms to the floorboards, as if feeling for roots beneath. When spring comes, she said, voice steadier than the wind outside, I'm planting here. Wild roses, maybe. Thorn bush. Something the snow can't kill easy. Eli almost smiled, just the bare ghost of it, hidden in his bristled jaw. Roots'll hold this place down, he said. Might hold you too. She tipped her head, a half nod, half question. You want it gone come thaw? He shook his head once. Simple truth. Ain't for me to want. You're here. You stay if you need. Mara let out a slow breath, like the rope exhaled through her ribs at last. She rose, walked to the door, lifted the latch with a hand that no longer trembled. The cold met her like an old enemy. She stepped out barefoot, feet sinking into the drift. Beside the porch, she bent, scooped a fistful of snow stained pink by Bram's blood. She let it melt through her fingers, watched it drip back to the earth that had named her curse, and now held her like thawing dirt holds seed. She looked back once. Eli leaned against the doorframe, shotgun resting easy now, not as a threat, but as a fence. She held his eyes, soft but unflinching, then turned back to the dusk. Somewhere beyond the trees, wolves sang. Not for her this time, but for the men who'd limped away empty-handed. She knelt by the porch, dug her fingers into the frozen crust. No grave this time, no rope to bury. Just a hole scraped deep enough to take what the fire hadn't swallowed. Ash and old blood. She pressed them down into the cold dirt, thumbed it smooth like a fresh seedbed. When she stood, her breath rose white and warm, drifting over Mercy who stood calm under the lean-to, as if she too knew spring was promised now, not begged for. Eli stepped out beside her, boots creaking boards that once threatened to splinter under a scattergun's demand. He looked at her hands, rope scars dark with salve, palms dusted with black ash and pink snow. You done? He asked. She nodded, eyes finding the place where the ashes lay. For now, she said. Then quieter, for now's enough. They stood there as night crept in, the cold trying its best to hush what warmth they'd built. But inside that small shack, where a rope had burned, where a girl found her teeth, where a man's silence wrapped a curse in fire instead of frost, the roots dug deep. Somewhere in the hush between the trees and the creek's soft mutter, the world learned a thing worth keeping. A curse left breathing is a seed. A seed left burning is a thorn. A thorn that blooms in snow can break the spine of winter if given just enough fire and a place to stay. And so they did. If you felt that fire tonight, hit subscribe. Stay by our campfire for more tales that burn and heal.